It might now be all up to the state attorneys general, and Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller seems to know that. The president's pardon power is limited to federal cases. The president cannot pardon anyone charged or convicted of a state crime like murder or money laundering. And now that we have spent considerable time here discussing the president's ability to pardon away the Mueller investigation, the case has reportedly taken an important turn beyond the scope of presidential pardon power. If the president pardons Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr. and Michael Flynn and Ivanka Trump and anyone touched by Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, then the Mueller investigation would essentially collapse. But what if New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman is also on the case? Politico is reporting exactly that tonight. Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team is working with New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman on its investigation into Paul Manafort and his financial transactions, according to several people familiar with the matter. The cooperation could potentially provide Mueller with additional leverage to get Manafort to cooperate in the larger investigation into Trump's campaign, as Trump does not have pardon power over state crimes. This is what Joe Biden would call a big deal. Federal prosecutors normally have nothing to do with state prosecutors. Federal prosecutors have a bit of a superiority complex over state and local prosecutors, but not this time. Politico also reports the two teams have shared evidence and talked frequently in recent weeks about a potential case. These people said. One of the people familiar with the progress on the case said both Mueller's team and Schneiderman's have collected evidence on financial crimes, including potential money laundering. People close to Manafort say the team has pressured him by approaching family members and former business partners. A number of other firms and people who have worked with him have received subpoenas. Also tonight, we have new information on who has testified before Robert Mueller's grand jury. The Financial Times reports Rinat Akhmetshin, the lobbyist and former Soviet Army officer who met senior Trump campaign aides at a controversial meeting last year, has given evidence before a grand jury investigation, according to two people familiar with the matter. Mr. Akhmetshin gave testimony under oath for several hours on Friday, August 11th, in a sign that Special Counsel Robert Mueller is looking at the 2016 meeting as part of his investigation into links between Donald Trump's election campaign and Russia. Rinat Akhmetshin is suspected of having ties to Russian intelligence and is one of several Russians who were present at a June 9th, 2016 meeting with Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, at Trump Tower. And the New York Times is reporting that President Trump's longtime lawyer, Michael Cohen, sent an email to a spokesman for the Russian President Vladimir Putin. That spokesman, Mr. Peskov, on Wednesday confirmed to reporters that the Kremlin had received the email, but he said he did not respond to it and that his office did not get involved in such matters. Joining us now, the co-author of that New York Times article, investigative reporter Matt Arpuzzo. Also with us, Jed Sugarman, professor of law at Fordham University. And Matt, your article about Michael Cohen touched a lot of bases, including his very direct attempt to make contact with Vladimir Putin through his spokesman.
Right, and what we know, because Michael Cohen has turned over a lot of emails to Congress, what we know is that there was obviously a great outreach by people around Donald Trump in an effort in 2015 to try to build a Trump Tower Moscow. And as that deal fizzled, Michael Cohen, sort of in this last-ditch effort, sent an email to the general mailbox of the Russian press secretary. I mean, the Russian equivalent of press at whitehouse.gov, saying, hey, can you help me resurrect this deal? But, you know, look, Michael Cohen is really is putting his cards on the table. He has gone through the dossier, as it's been called, point by point, and is issuing, you know, pretty serious categorical denials that there was any sort of Russian collusion. And he's trying to follow in the Jared Kushner mold and say, this is all bogus, there's nothing to this, kind of put up or shut up.
Judge Sugarman, your reaction to these developments in the case tonight and to Matt's point about Michael Cohen's pushback.
Well, let me address the significance of connecting with New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. This is a very significant development, particularly because we're hearing increasingly that there is discussion behind closed doors about Trump and pardons for this circle. This is a very important point to make, which is that the president cannot affect state prosecutions and state crimes through the pardon power. There are some complicated procedures, but let's say the question is if Trump then tells Manafort or Flynn, hold on, just toe the party line, and I'll make sure to pardon you. If there are New York or other attorneys general and other state prosecutors who are stepping forward, they cannot count on that pardon to save them. They will have to face the pressure and will face state pressure to cooperate and turn state's witness. And so it's important for Schneiderman and Mueller to coordinate to figure out what's going on behind the scenes.
And Matt, the coordination with Schneiderman has to be an extreme irritant to the president. It was Eric Schneiderman who fought the president to a $25 million settlement on the Trump University case. That was $25 million that President Trump vowed he would never pay, but was forced to pay as a result of Attorney General Schneiderman's pursuit of that case. And so Schneiderman has been on the Trump case before.
Sure. I mean, look, if you are Bob Mueller, of course you're going to want to make sure you know who's in what lane in New York. When you're looking at banking stuff, New York is the center of the universe. But the long and the short of it, at least the political reality in the short term, is none of these guys, whether it's Manafort or Flynn, can be playing in the short term for pardons. I mean, they've got to be playing to win, and you know they've got powerful lawyers, and you don't want to hold out your hope for a pardon. That, frankly, opens up a whole host of problems for the president, not the least of which is that once you've been pardoned, Congress can haul you in front of an open session and demand you testify publicly because you don't have the right to the Fifth Amendment protections anymore. So, I mean, that's interesting in the theoretical, but right now, where the rubber meets the road, this is a very live federal investigation with a lot of real consequences hanging over everyone.
Judge Sugarman, to that Fifth Amendment protections point, it's a bit complicated now, isn't it, when we consider the possibility of state charges? Because if Paul Manafort, say, was pardoned by President Trump and then he was pulled into these congressional committees to testify, and when he tried to invoke the Fifth Amendment, he might make the claim that the Fifth Amendment he's invoking is in protection of himself against state charges, not the federal charges that the president has pardoned him for.
That's correct. I think there was a misimpression from the point that was just made before, because they could still invoke the Fifth Amendment precisely because they could still face state prosecution. So the question is not whether by accepting a pardon they can no longer invoke the Fifth Amendment. It's the other pressure. It's the pressure precisely because they could face state prosecution. But keep in mind, just because someone might be pardoned for a past crime, but then later on they perjure themselves and you have documents or other witnesses come forward, you can't pardon someone for a future crime. So the possibility that they're forced to testify either in court or in Congress or in state court, the pardons don't affect a future perjury. There is an important point in New York and in other states about the double jeopardy question. If there are some states that extend a statute to protect against a second prosecution if the federal prosecutors have started a prosecution and not just an indictment, but if there are witnesses that have testified or juries have been sworn in, then New York has a state statute that sometimes prevents a state prosecution. So this timing gets complicated, and that's another reason why it's so important that Mueller and Schneiderman are talking and coordinating so that they can figure out the timing of when to bring indictments. Ordinarily, there's a policy where you defer, where a state prosecutor waits and defers to a federal prosecutor, but it's only a policy of deference and waiting for federal prosecutors. If they're talking behind the scenes and realize that maybe it's better for Schneiderman to go first because of the threat of Trump's pardons and because of this complicated rule that New York has, this is what's significant about those conversations.
Yeah, that's why this could truly be historic, that a federal special prosecutor basically assigned to investigate the President of the United States might make the choice to, in effect, step aside for a state attorney general to make that case in some of the elements of the case against some of the people involved in the case, might step aside in favor of that state attorney general. We've never seen that before. Matt Apuzzo, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. And Judge Sugarman, thank you too for joining us. Really appreciate it. Federal prosecutors normally have nothing to do with state prosecutors. Federal prosecutors have a bit of a superiority complex over state and local prosecutors, but not this time. Politico also reports the two teams have shared evidence and talked frequently in recent weeks about a potential case. These people. It might now be all up to the state attorneys general, and Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller seems to know that. The president's pardon power is limited to federal cases. The president cannot pardon anyone charged or convicted of a state crime like murder or money laundering. And now that we have spent considerable time here discussing the president's ability to pardon away the Mueller investigation, the case has reportedly taken an important turn beyond the scope of presidential pardon power. If the president pardons Paul Manafort and Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr. and Michael Flynn and Ivanka Trump and anyone touched by Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, several people familiar with the matter. The cooperation could potentially provide Mueller with additional leverage to get Manafort to cooperate in the larger investigation into Trump's campaign, as Trump does not have pardon power over state crimes. This is what Joe Biden would call a big deal. And the Mueller investigation would essentially collapse. But what if New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman is also on the case? Politico is reporting exactly that tonight. Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team is working with New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman on its investigation into Paul Manafort and his financial transactions, according to